Okay, our next item is South Coast 101 HOV Lanes Project Draft Revised EIR. And Mr. Dayton, are you going to start the presentation for staff? Thank you.
Mr. Chair and Planning Commissioners, good afternoon. My name is Rob Dayton. Also have Dan Gullett from Transportation Planning. And then some people who are not in the room from our staff, I'd just like to acknowledge Derek Bailey and Peter Brown, who have been working extensively on this project. We're here to talk to you about the South Coast 101 HOV Lanes project and the re-release of a revised draft EIR for our review. I want to just explain that the purpose of this hearing is to receive comments on the draft revised EIR from the Planning Commission. And I also want to just point out that if you are a member of the public and you're making a comment on this, you don't make a comment to the city. You actually make a comment to Caltrans, directly to Caltrans. And then I also want to, we're going to turn the presentation over to Caltrans just for a bit, but I want to introduce Scott Eads and Jason Wilkinson, who are a part of the team, the environmental team of Caltrans, and just some other people in the room. Tony Harris is the corridor advisor to the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. And we also have Steve Vandenberg, Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. And I think Fred Luna was here. He was here. And then I acknowledge Matt Daubertine from the county. The county has jurisdiction that's affected by the freeway expansion. So anyway, so there's some other people, and I just want to give Scott a chance. And I didn't see any of you maybe one of you at the Caltrans hearing where they explained exactly what is the process, because we had an EIR before. So why are we back and what happened? So Scott, if you would just give us that piece, and I'll get your presentation up.
Hey, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I'm Scott Eads, and I am the corridor advisor for Caltrans. And here with me is Jason Wilkinson. He's the environmental manager for the project. And just have a few slides here. I want to walk you through a little bit of background, and then we'll move on to the bulk of our presentation, which is really about the content of the draft revised EIR and our process in getting that project or that document developed. So first, by way of background, the genesis of the 101 HOV project is really based in the 101 in Motion process that was sponsored by SBCAG several years ago. This process concluded in 2005, and the goal was to try to have community consensus amongst agencies in the South Coast area on how we address the congestion problem that we have on the 101 corridor in the South Coast. And so that was the goal of the process. It involved literally hundreds of stakeholders, a lot of local decision makers. There was technical analysis as well as a number of public meetings. And it was an iterative process that looked at different packages of improvements and ultimately came to a single package that was the consensus recommendation that was adopted by all agencies in the county. And that is what was deemed the lane and the train strategy. And the lane and the train strategy was really all about adding an HOV lane in the section of 101 where it remains two lanes in the southern part of the city of Santa Barbara down through Carpinteria to the county line. And then the trains portion of the strategy was to bring rail service, commuter-friendly rail service up into Santa Barbara from Ventura and point south and up into Goleta, in fact. So those are the key components, and then there was additional components in terms of increased transit services, managed transportation demand, and other smaller components that were all about this larger package working together to provide congestion relief long term. This slide here shows the different components and the amount of benefit that they bring to the table in providing that long-term congestion relief. As you can see, the HOV lanes is a key part of that. And the other thing that you can see here is that, again, the larger strategy all has to work together ultimately to provide the congestion relief that we need. That additional commuter service on its own does not provide the congestion relief we need, nor does an HOV lane project on its own provide that congestion relief we need. And the other thing I'll mention here is that the HOV lanes are are peak hour focused HOV lanes, which means that they're available only to selected users during peak hours to manage those peak times, and then the rest, the 24-hour day and on weekends, it's available to any user that's moving through the corridor. So how does this lane strategy come together? The one component that's the HOV portion of it. It's really a four-part strategy. 3 of the 4 pieces have either been constructed or are under construction now. The first is the Milpas to Hot Springs project that was completed in 2012 in the city of Santa Barbara. The second is the Muscle Shoals to Carpinteria project. That was a 6-mile long project that provided HOV lanes in each direction on 101 from the community of Muscle Shoals up through into the Carpinteria, into the city of Carpinteria. The third project is a Linnecasitas Pass interchanges project that's under construction now. If you've driven through there, you'll see a lot of disturbance. And that project is fully funded. It's under construction. It should be completed in about 3 years. Last piece of that puzzle is the 101 HOV lanes project. That's the fourth piece, the number 4 there you see. And that's the subject of the project today and the environmental document that we just released. That will provide the final piece of this larger picture to provide the HOV lanes all the way through that 16-mile corridor. The other thing I just want to mention that there is a series of related or parallel projects associated with the HOV and other improvement efforts in this corridor. There's 2 of those are highlighted in the city of Santa Barbara, Olive Mill intersection with Coast Village Road and the Cabrillo Railroad structure replacement. And then there's others in the county and down in Carpinteria, and specifically Olive Mill, the railroad structure, and San Ysidro interchange. The SBCAG board in 2014, as part of a larger decision for supporting the HOV project moving forward, deemed those specific improvements as important parallel improvements, and that directed SBCAG staff to work with local jurisdictions to find a way to move those projects forward. So those still have that designation, and they are taking on a life of their own and moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason Wilkinson. And
why don't you just go and
why don't we
and
switch?
I'll just,
You want me to do this? Okay,
yeah.
That's fine.
So just to give you a little bit of history on the project, we released a draft environmental document in March of 2012. We received comments from federal, state, and local governments along with the public, and responded to those comments and released a final environmental document in August of 2014. Shortly thereafter, there was 2 sequel lawsuits filed against the project. One of them had to do with noise, and in that case, the judge ruled in favor of Caltrans. And the other related to the traffic analysis, in which the judge ruled in favor of the plaintiff. A writ was issued in January 2016, shortly thereafter. So a summary of that ruling was that Caltrans and not. The other important point that came out of that writ was that all other portions of the EIR remain valid. So the body of work that was completed in the report remains valid. So what the Caltrans team did after the writ to comply with it is that the environmental team met with headquarters staff, environmental staff, along with our legal team, along with the traffic engineers and headquarters traffic. And what they did is they came up with established evaluation methods and standards of significance that they could use throughout the corridor that could be applied not just through the corridor but statewide. They performed the analysis, developed findings, and then released the draft revised EIR. So it's just important to note that quite a number of technical studies that were prepared for the project. They were generated by Dowling and Kittleson Associates. That established a traffic analysis subcommittee, and they were involved in preparing the model for the project along with the operational analysis. That team comprised members of City of Santa Barbara staff, City of Carpinteria staff, and along with county staff. And they reviewed all of the work products that came out of those studies. So December 2nd, the document was released to the public for circulation. It was originally set for 45 days public circulation, but at the request of the City of Santa Barbara, we extended that to 60 days. The document's available at our website, along with the libraries listed there, and at our office in San Luis Obispo. So if you'd like to make a comment on the document, you can submit it to there's a address listed on the website or inside the environmental document. So if you would like to provide a comment, you can do it a number of ways. And we'd be accepting comments up into January 31st of this month. So this slide just indicates the 108 study intersections that we looked at. They begin right at the Santa Barbara, Ventura County line, all the way up to Los Carneros in Goleta. So there's 108 study intersections that we looked at. So this just focuses on the city of Santa Barbara. And within the Santa Barbara, there's 47 study intersections that we looked at that were part of our analysis. So we had our approach that came out of meeting with the environmental team was that we would look at the corridor at level of service and seconds of delay. We would next look at the study intersections, and what we would look at is whether or not the intersection had changed from a level of service D or lower with an additional 20 or 10 seconds based on the signal type. The other thing we'd be looking at is the 95% Q for the off-ramps. So what we found is corridor-wide that there was some improvements during some periods of the day and added delay in others. And when we looked at the study intersections, 5 intersections were triggered opening day and 7 in 2040. So 5 of the 7 are triggered at opening day and in 2040. And we also discovered that the queues did not exceed the off-ramp lengths. So this slide just shows the 7 intersections that were triggered by our standard. There's 3 in Carpinteria, 1 in the county, and then 3 in the city of Santa Barbara. And these 3 here are the ones in the city of Santa Barbara: State Street 154 southbound on-ramp. The other is Milpas, the southbound off-ramp, the first one. And the next is the Cabrillo-Los Patos intersection. So for our proposed mitigation strategy, for 2 of them would be the state would take the lead on making improvements at Milpas Street, the southbound off-ramp, and State Street. The options there for improvements would be a second right-hand turn lane ramp at Milpas, and for State Street, Route 154 would be signal coordination and optimization of the signal. And Cabrillo-Los Patos, Caltrans would be looking to make a contribution to the city for them to make the improvements at that intersection. And the 2 options there would be to install a signal or a single lane roundabout. And our strategy, of course, would be to improvements would be designed to achieve the no build or better conditions. So for example, if an intersection with a project there was an additional delay of 10 seconds, then any mitigation that we would provide would reduce the delay by at least 10 seconds. And improvements would be expected to be completed prior to opening day. And the other ones that would be for 2040, they would be expected to be constructed prior to the impact. So local agency coordination, we've already been meeting with the city of Santa Barbara. We met with them before we released the draft revised environmental document December 2nd. We've had a couple meetings with them since then. We're looking to continue to coordinate with them on determining mitigation options and amount of funding towards contribution to Los Patos, and just ensuring that the improvements would take place prior to opening day. So at this point, I'll be handing it over to Scott E. so he could discuss the next steps on the project. Thank you.
Okay. Second to last slide here. So in terms of our process moving forward, we expect to accept public comments as well as comments from local jurisdictions and other agencies perhaps, and then complete the final environmental document. We'll be looking at every one of the comments that comes in and responding to comments that are related to the content of the document, and then integrating those into a final revised EIR. We expect that would be approved late spring of this year. And then from there we move directly into beginning final design and permitting, and part of that is coastal development permitting for the first phase of the project, and begin construction shortly after that. Just as a reminder, this project, due to the size and scope of the project, we'd be expecting to construct this in smaller pieces. So probably 4 to 5 independent pieces that could be funded and then move into construction independently. And then in terms of our early expectation in terms of phasing, The preliminary expectation, this was discussed recently in front of the SBCAG board, is that the first segment would likely, or the first phase would likely occur in the city of Carpinteria, and that that we are also working towards a specific phasing recommendation which would go before the SBCAG board in the spring of 2017. And if there are any questions on either the phasing or related projects, either Tony Harris or Fred Luna are also available if there's questions on any of that content. I'll turn it back over to staff.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Eads. And I think that presentation does an excellent job of giving you the context of where we're at in the environmental process. And you saw a slide very similar to this in Mr. Eads' presentation. What I want to call attention to you is the portion of the project that is actually within the city of Santa Barbara. It is actually a pretty small portion when you consider the totality of the mileage, but from Sycamore Creek, this is the bird refuge, over to the interchange at Olive Mill is the portion of the project that is within the city of Santa Barbara, and that the entire portion of that is also within the coastal zone. Caltrans is the lead agency, and it has prepared the environmental impact report. We're the responsible agency, or a responsible agency. So here's what a responsible agency does, and this is what the Planning Commission should be looking to when you think about comments. The comments on the EIR should really focus on the shortcomings and additional alternatives or mitigation measures, and then I'll narrow that down even further by just saying what Mr. Eads said about the judge who did the writ on the first EIR really has narrowed the scope to the intersections. So we're really focused on, and this EIR, the revised EIR, is focused just on intersections. So we're not looking at air quality or visual impacts. We're looking at intersections. The Planning Commission must use the EIR for its review of the coastal development permit. So when it comes time for Caltrans an SBCAG to come for a permit in the coastal development permit, you will have to use this document as your decision-making document, and specifically, last bullet, for mitigation measures. If the city becomes responsible for mitigating environmental effects of the portion of the project it decides to approve. So because we're responsible in agency and a permitting agency, any impacts, we become then responsible for those impacts when we issue that permit based on what the environmental impact says. This slide you don't have in your packet. I just thought this was kind of be interesting to talk about, because when we talk about the freeway has a world of good, and it's to help people get here. The major goal is to help people get here from primarily from Ventura and beyond to the job supply that we have here. I just want to harken back to pre-1991. It's an important year to me because that's the year I came to the city and took a position with the city, but it's also the city that the signals came out in the crosstown freeway. And so what I've got up there is green would be free flow and red would be backup. This was the condition when we had the signals. The reason that those lines are a little bit apart coming in, so this would be coming in from the south, is the signals started about here at Anacapa, and then the signals started right after Castillo coming southbound, and the backups would fluctuate like that. And so we had a very robust system aside from that. When we took out those signals, then we provided the capacity we really needed through our city, and we also made it very much more attractive to live further away from the city. And that was also, as it's the goal of the freeway, it was expansion we have before us now. It was also a goal then, is to get people in to see jobs. I say that because when we look at this environmental document, and we look at now we've gone from 1991 to 2020, and we're looking specifically at the AM flow. So think morning peak hour, and this is without the freeway construction. And this section right here, in this portion of the freeway at Las Positas, is the most congested portion of the freeway in the county of Santa Barbara. It's got it's got a peak hour in both directions, and other people are going to Goleta, people are coming to Santa Barbara, and you can see those backups. This red line represents the backup that will go all the way off the screen to Carpinteria, and that's a very, very large backup. It's not done justice on this slide because that red line goes very far. But just to show you what the change is, when we take this and we make this 6 lanes, we're going to shift the congestion that is backed up through Carpinteria, and that comes into the city, and that is represented in this next slide. And these are all these lines are taken from the queuing on the freeway from the EIR, and it's just to give you an example of why our intersections impacted in the city of Santa Barbara. The queue length then, which is again from the backup at Las Positas, which we're not improving, gets longer and goes all the way to Milpa Street. This, you're not seeing it, but this queue gets much longer as well. The intersections that I've got highlighted here are just the city impacted intersections based on our land use projections. So you can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. And so when people come into the city in the future with the freeway congested, then they're more likely to get off on other routes and get off, say, in this case, at Milpas in the morning. And that's what the study shows, a lot more cars getting off at Milpas because the freeway becomes congested, and that's how we get intersection issues. Conversely, in the PM peak hour, this would be the 2020, what's envisioned then for the PM peak hour flow, so think evening. This would be without the freeway improvements, and you can see right here, this is the current bottleneck right here over in Montecito, and the backup that occurs now from that. And then again, you can see a backup coming into the city for the northbound direction. And then again, you see the congestion points, which are at Las Positas, and the backflows that occur. When we add the freeway and release this congestion right here, what happens is it moves in here, and the queue gets longer through town all the way backed up into Montecito. What's the good news, and that's what we're trying to achieve, is that there's no more bottleneck here, and people can leave the city a lot faster. So there is some improvement, even from some intersections in that standpoint, and that was acknowledged in the presentation that Mr. Wilkinson presented. So kind of getting back to the intersections in the EIR, Mr. Wilkinson mentioned that we were a part of the team that developed all the documents that went into the EIR, particularly the forecast document, which is an appendix. So you didn't see that unless you went and looked online. What was used at that time, and that's not in this document, but at the time before, was a congestion CMP, congestion management program or plan thresholds. And there you have the thresholds right there at D, adding 20 trips, at E, level service, that's level service in an intersection, adding 10, and F, adding 10 trips. The reason that made sense to us at the time is because the freeway expansion is itself a congestion management program project. There was a deficiency plan in the congestion management program, and so that created the freeway, the deficiency. So looking at the intersections along the freeway, particularly in the city, if they were going to trigger congestion management triggers, we thought that was appropriate. It's kind of like apples to apples. In that under those thresholds, the study identified 6 project-specific impacts in the city and 9 cumulative traffic impacts at intersections. Those impacts turned out they weren't disclosed in the EIR, which eventually became part of that lawsuit issue. Impacts to the congestion management program, or those impacts that were cited in the document, will cause future capital expenditures that the city will be responsible for. So those thresholds weren't used, and what we find, as Mr. Wilkinson explained, is a different one. I'm going to explain it to you because we're not familiar with the we're not familiar with the HCM. We're mainly doing ICU, which is a percentage of the intersection. This is actually delay. This is preferred in the industry for operations mainly because this is the actual number of average seconds that a person would expect to be delayed at an intersection. That's how we measure congestion. So you can see some of these seconds of delay and some descriptions, level of service C, 20 to 35 seconds of delay, and then D, 35 to 55 seconds of delay. The thresholds that were picked are based on that delay. So when you get to and actually Caltrans calls them standards of significance. Anything that goes from level of service A through C to D, or then once you're at D, adds 20 seconds of delay. And you can kind of see where that makes sense over here, or actually what it actually represents. So at D, the first D is 35 to 55 seconds, so 20 seconds would be a full level of service change. That becomes the standard that Caltrans is measuring in this document when there's a full level of service change or degrading. This the project specific versus cumulative is the 2020. If there's an impact in 2020 with these thresholds or standards, then it would be a project specific impact, and if it occurs in 2040, then it would be a cumulative impact. So under those standards, as they mentioned, 7 intersections corridor wide, 3 within the city, and those were pointed out. We actually we wanted to make Caltrans aware of this immediately because we've been in dialogue and it's been very helpful with the team, and so we did, and they came back with some responses that I just want to make sure that we're showing what they're saying, and that there are some errors with the ones that have boxes on them, and they're going to be looking to correct those levels of service to show what happened or what was wrong. And then here's another selection. So any of the intersections that have boxes in the scenarios, these are, they're saying, need to be revised. And then just to show you the Carrillo one, so this is the level of service F that goes to C. It just those kind of things that concern us, and we want to have a good explanation of why that is, because if the baseline that they're considering the freeway against gets better, then there's a lot more room for impact. Other discrepancies in volume sets that we found in Table 2.2, which is in the body of the EIR, just some math errors in transferring from the 2011 forecast document to the current document. These intersections show that in this column it shows what the freeway is adding for the 2040 analysis. So the document's saying that these volumes are added, for instance, at Milpas and Quientos. It's saying 15 trips added in the EIR, when in fact it's 235 if you do the math from the forecast document. Or another at Indian Muerto and Milpas in the AM, the document says that only 9 are added when it's 637 in the trips added in the 2011 forecast document. So just some math errors somehow carried forward, and I mentioned these to Mr. Eads, and we will continue to work with Caltrans to find out what exactly is going on, and if the level of service is wrong. I mean, these are the proposed mitigations from the document, and again, 3 of these are intersections, and I want to walk you through those mitigations and some of our challenges with this. We'd like to have that dialogue. We'd like to see it in the document. Project-specific impacts, in our opinion, if they're project-specific, not cumulative. And then walking through just...
one second,
yeah.
I think there was a pertinent question.
Mr. Dayton, I have a question for you. So, in your opinion, or our city staff's opinion, the data that you have found to be problematic, shall we say, the calculations, how do they correlate with the proposed mitigations? Because now I'm asking myself, if the data is, I don't want to say wrong, if there's, I'm going to be hard pressed to comment on whether the mitigations are sufficient or appropriate and sufficient if the data on which they're founded is in question. Could you comment? Could you help me?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, agreed. And I'll walk you through some of the specifics a little bit about our... Again, you have a question, we have the same question, and
Okay.
we'd like to get to the bottom of it.
Excuse me, may I ask a question, Mr. Chair? Yeah. Mr. Dayton, just under the discrepancies that you talked about, Do you think that the number of impacted intersections, are going to increase based on the discrepancies you found?
We do, and if I get through the presentation, you'll see all that. There's probably something I have left out, and you're going to have a question. I'm going to be pleased to answer that. So patience with us. The LOS, LOS. It says LOS. Los Patos and Cabrillo impact. Just a little bit about that. The EIR cites two possibilities for mitigation. I'm going to show you that location. Actually, I'll show it to you right now. This is at the bird refuge. This is Los Patos. You know this intersection now because this is an off-ramp. And in the future, this is actually a dangerous off-ramp. One of the great improvements of this project is to close this off-ramp. But this is the intersection that's impacted by the project, and it's a project-specific impact. The mitigations are to do a roundabout or a traffic signal. And so we looked at this, we looked at the traffic signal and found because of the close proximity of this intersection to the Cabrillo interchange and some of the queuing going on from the interchange, a signal is not appropriate from a safety standpoint and a congestion standpoint. And so we would like to see the roundabout put there. And we've had some preliminary discussions with Caltrans, and it looks feasible to do that. On the southbound 101 Milpas impact, this is a little tricky because of the southbound Milpas off-ramp. There's actually two off-ramps for southbound Milpas. And if you're going to go south on, let's say you're going to go to the Doubletree or to the Cabrillo Bathhouse, you can get off at the first off-ramp and turn right, or you can get off at the second one and turn left and get to the same place. A little bit confusing, but the impact was cited at the first off-ramp. And that is this location right here. And so you get off, and there's no signal here. And the proposal to mitigate this, and primarily a backup onto the main line. So this is a safety issue we are dealing with here. We have that issue at this intersection now. So putting a dual lanes to do that, it just makes it more intense for pedestrians and harder, probably bigger of a safety issue. There's many pedestrians in this corridor. And so we would look to an alternative mitigation for this. And then looking at the other intersection, the second southbound ramp intersection, which is intersection 49, it also appears to be impacted. And it's the balancing of understanding in the distribution. One of the tricks is what is the human behavior and balance of what's the proportion between these two ramps that people will actually use is one of the things we're challenged by. This intersection is very tricky because of the Indian Muerto. It causes it to be not a traditional intersection. It's a multi-leg intersection. The other thing that's challenging is this long pedestrian movement. And so the mitigation solutions will have to deal with these two things and trying to figure out what's the safest way to prevent that backup onto the main line. These are additional impacts. This is to Commissioner Wiscombe's question. You asked, did the discrepancies lead us to believe that there were other impacts? And you're correct, it did. And these are two examples from the calculations or the figures that I showed you before. And actually using the Caltrans standard threshold, these would be triggered as cumulative impacts. So this is Milpas and 500 and Indian Muerto at Milpas and the southbound ramps. Incidentally, Milpas and 500 was also found to be a project-specific impact in the last round under the CMP thresholds. The Olive Mill interchange. These are comments that those of you who were here before for the last EIR will be familiar with. Now we know much more than we did before when we were in the EIR because this is one of the intersections that Mr. Eads pointed out as a parallel project. And SBCAG and Caltrans and the City of Santa Barbara and the County of Santa Barbara have been working on this intersection as a parallel project and we've brought it to you as a roundabout solution. And that roundabout solution can work in this case, we believe. It still's got a long way to go through it. But let me tell you the thing that we're concerned about. So we think that this improvement is not only an impact, the freeway's impact on this industry is not only an impact, but it's critical to the success of the freeway expansion. And so the difference would be from a parallel project to an impacted intersection would be that the project would be responsible for the costs. And I think that that's the big unknown for people is who's going to pay for the costs and this is, sorry if it's hard to orient yourself from looking at this, it was for me. The freeway is right here, and the funk zone is over here. The beach is down here. And so the queue that's an issue is queuing back into the funk zone. It queues beyond the next intersection. Haley Castillo impacts. This particular impact could be a challenge for many of our intersections, and so I'm just going to point it out for Haley and Castillo, but this is one of our concerns. And this is what happens when we have future congestions. Remember I showed you at the beginning how the queues on the freeway change in the peak hours? Well, at the Haley, at the Castillo interchange, at the Haley on-ramp, there is a tremendous flow of cars that are coming primarily from Santa Barbara City College, but also the Mesa. And they're coming through the interchange, and you can even see how the road is darker here from the travel. When this light is green, it's green for a significant amount of time because it's only one lane, and we've got to get everyone onto the freeway. The challenge will be in the future is that freeway will be at stop, backed up, really slow, not enough capacity to take all the green time that we can assign it. So then what happens, and it's hard to explain this in terms of in intersection terms, but then we get backups because we can't get people off the local road and onto the freeway. This Mr. Bailey is predicting that this would probably take place at Garden Street and Milpas as well. It helps if you have a longer ramp where you can queue cars for longer periods of time between cycle. And the reason we point this one out is that Haley doesn't have that long on-ramp, if that makes sense. The Cabrillo interchange impacts. It's interesting that when we saw that this is a more recent picture from the internet, but you can see the backup of the cars even in the picture to the Cabrillo interchange, and that's mainly because there's only one lane under the railroad. And so if you can picture when the new southbound on and the new interchange will be just on the other side of this freeway bridge, and when it's a red light and you want to go right, you could go right onto the freeway, but it's a red light and someone's going straight, you're stuck behind them, you can't get on the freeway, so everyone has to wait for the green light. There's no going around it. And then if there's a pedestrian crossing the ramp face, then the right turner is going to have to wait for the pedestrian, and the through route movement won't be able to go. This is very typical whenever we do interchange improvements we handle over the railroad tracks. Under the railroad tracks, a little bit more challenge. This is La Cumbre. When we improved that, you can see the fresh new bridge. When we did it out in Goleta, the railroad tracks being the red line, we widened the bridge, and it just makes sense to widen it under there. Now, having said that, we do have a team effort to do a parallel project for the railroad bridge. We don't know how expensive that project's going to be. And the question again becomes not that we don't want it, not that we're all not working on it. The question is, how is it funded? And so we would see this as being a freeway liability and being funded with the freeway. That's how the city staff would view that. Then there's a coastal act and local coastal plan issues, and you're probably more familiar with this. This is just the issue of getting at the interchange, at the Cabrillo interchange in the coastal zone, and you can see the nice sidewalks that were done with the last improvement, but then just no connection under the railroad bridge. That would be obviously taken care of if we were to replace that railroad bridge. The next steps, and Mr. Eads spelled them out well for us, it will be at City Council on Tuesday, the 24th of January. And the public comment period closes on the 31st. and then we would move, Caltrans will respond with that. I do want to say and acknowledge that we have an open dialogue with Caltrans, and we're working to resolve these issues in real time, and hopefully we'll be able to resolve them quicker and before there's a need for response to comments. Certification of the EIR would be their step after response to comments, and then at some point we'll be back to this commission with the coastal development permit, and of course the HLC and ABR design reviews, and then the action. Again, the public comment, we've all said it, it's we're saying again, here's the information to give your comments. It's directly to Caltrans. As Commissioner Thompson pointed out, if we do get a comment on the freeway, we will forward it to Caltrans, but this is the information if you're watching on TV.
First public speaker will be Art Ludwig. Art, and the other speakers will have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Chair,
subject.
Commissioners, and Caltrans. I think this is the most consequential of many big infrastructure projects coming up, and perhaps the most consequential planning decision that you guys will ever make. And staff has done a remarkable job of addressing some of the issues with this project, but I think that that's just the very surface, and it goes way deeper than that. I think some questions that I suggest you ask yourselves before lighting the fuse on this are, one, what happens to congestion if unfunded aspects of the package don't work out? So there's 36% contribution from parts of the package that are not funded and are not part of this project. It'd be really interesting to run the traffic analysis without, for example, 18% increased train ridership, which is both unfunded and perhaps unlikely. Induced demand is not considered. It was an interesting point that taking the freeway lights out made it easier to buy a house in Ventura. So how's that going to change things? 3, what will the effects be on the surface grid congestion? The map that showed the red moving showed it just on the freeway. I think that the most important map that you guys really should be looking at is what happens to the whole rest of the city grid. And I think that really what's going to happen is the congestion that's been out in the largely unpopulated coast will be moving into the front yards of every house in Santa Barbara. Impacts on city bike usage. I asked Rebecca Bjork what was keeping her up at night. I was surprised to hear it wasn't there being 7% capacity in Lake Kachuma. It was actually the unfunded projects on the city road grid. Imagine thousands more cars on potholed city streets. It's going to make incredibly harsh conditions for bicyclists. Millennials really don't want to own cars. They'd rather bike. How are they going to do that if all those cars are there? And what's going to happen to traffic if they start getting cars as well? All of those impacts are cumulative, by the way. They multiply each other. Climate safety is perhaps the most important lens that we should be looking at any decision through, and that's not really considered. All told, I would characterize this project as a quality of life death spiral. If you want Santa Barbara to be like Los Angeles, this is your project. I don't really feel there's any mitigation possible. I think this would be a type 1 error. I don't think anybody would support this. No one wants to be stuck in traffic, but I think if people could see into the future what it was going to be like, there would be no support for it. Thank you.
Anna Citrin.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Anna Citrin with the Law Office of Mark Shatillo, and we represent the Transportation Futures Committee, and we were the second lawsuit that was mentioned up on the screen here. And I just want to briefly note that the errors that were identified by Judge Anderle in Caltrans' first EIR were not minor, insignificant errors. They were very significant errors that went directly to the heart of the document and also to its to CEQA's purpose of informing the public about the impacts of projects. And, for example, the judge said that the EIR utterly failed in its informational function and called it an abdication of Caltrans' responsibility under CEQA. Now, I have to say that a very excellent presentation by city staff, I think, highlights that Caltrans is making many of the same errors that they made before. And that is really unfortunate, because here they were given another opportunity to be more transparent, to bring this information out to the public in a revised environmental impact report, and it looks like they're hiding the ball again. We would, the fact that they're not considering pedestrian or bicycle safety impacts in the revised document at all, when we heard from staff about the significant impacts to pedestrians that will occur at the at the intersections that will be impacted, and those impacts will extend not only to the intersections identified in the report, but as Mr. Ludwig noted, throughout the grid in the city. And those are impacts that really need to be looked at and carefully evaluated, and also mitigation devised to ensure that pedestrians and bicyclists are not adversely impacted, and that we're not disincentivizing the type of sustainability that we want to encourage in the city. So we're going to be submitting written comments to Caltrans, of course. We think it's unfortunate that Caltrans isn't having a public approval hearing. That means that the public's last opportunity is to comment on the EIR. And as we saw last time, after very significant and critical comments came in from the city and others, Caltrans declined to recirculate the EIR to allow the public to even see what those comments were before Caltrans went ahead and approved it. So we would urge that Caltrans take a much more transparent approach, that they have public approval hearings, and that they make sure to recirculate the document again before approving the project if there are very significant public comments received, which I believe there will be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our last speaker will be Jack Yusuferi.